let's actually start out with number one. The number one principle of winning is the 70-20-10 rule, which refers to the average shot rally length of a point. So my expertise has been over the last 8 years, junior tennis, college tennis, and the club level tennis, the amateur. I have watched a tremendous amount of ATP and WTA matches as well. And then, as most of you will know, I'm pretty good friends with Craig Hennessy, whom I met in 2015. I started my data discovery in 2012, which was independent of Craig. A lot of people don't realize that, but I like to talk about how Craig and I actually came to the same conclusion without even knowing each other. And then once we met each other, we sort of combined our resources and started to figure out there are a lot of similarities with the data. So I like to use the 60 to 70% percentage range when it comes to 0 to 4 shots, the point ending, and then anywhere from 20 to 30%, and the point ends 5 to 8 shots, and then another 10, 15%, sometimes even 5% of the points are plus non-extended rallies. And so the reason why this is number one is because if you just mentally ascend to the data, like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, you're right, Sterling, points last short. And you just leave it at that. And then you train in a way that reverses the data. So if you go out on the practice court as a coach or player and you're trying to learn to be consistent and hit 10, 12, 14 balls in a row, and you think that's going to win you matches, that's the misperception. Because you can train long rallies, and for many different reasons, for timing, for rhythm, for fitness, and that's all well and good. But if you think that's what you need to win more matches, you're going to be misguided, because the majority of the points are going to end with you only hitting 2 shots or not. And then the next level is 2 more shots for you. So it's 4 shots and 4 shots on each side of the net. 90% of the points end right there. And so the way you manage the first 2 shots and then the next 2 shots after that is if you practice those shots in rehearsal, if you set up games and scenarios and different challenges, point scenarios that actually challenge your ability to be consistent on the first 2 and then the next 2, you start to find that there's a big difference between starting the point and getting into a rhythm versus being in a rhythm after you've already completed 4 shots. And so we've done different levels of and different variations of this data. One of the things we've done is we've actually we've taken players and we just trained them 0 to 8 shots. And we do that for 6 months or 3 to 6 months. And then we see what their win percentage is when we go track their matches. What's their win percentage on plus non-extended rallies? And what we found is those players that train 0 to 8 exclusively, and we only do extended rally practice about 10 to maybe even 20% of the practice max. They actually do better in extended rallies when they're in match play. Their win percentage is higher than 50%. Right?
Sorry, Sterling, can you just explain, because we've got a few new people on today.
Sure.
Can we just do the basics again? Right down to what 0 to 4 means.
0 to 4 shots means that if it's a 0 shot rally, it was a double fault. If it's a 1 shot rally, the return did not come back. It could have been an ace. It could have been a return. A 2 shot rally is the serve goes in, the return goes in, the S1 or first shot after the serve goes out or is missed, and then 4 and on and so. So when you talk about successful shots in, that's what we're talking about, 0 to 4. How many points in a match end where the point ends on a 0 or it ends on a 4. And that's about 60 to 70% of the points. Sometimes it's higher. Then you get into and that's the first phase of the point, or the first stage of the point. We reference that as being the first strike stage of a point. And so many times we hear the word first strike and we think first strike is an offensive term. It can definitely be interpreted that way, but that's not what it's meant to emphasize when we talk about rally length. It's just first strike is a term we reference the first stage of the point, 0 to 4 shots. The next stage of the point is 5 to 8 shots. And we call that sort of the patterns of play stage. That's when patterns really begin to kind of open up and develop. And so if a point ends on the 5th shot, 6th, 7th, 8th shot, we have, the data has said that anywhere from 20 to 30% of the points end in that stage of the point. And then 9 shots or more, about 10% on average end. And so we, over the past 8 years, myself, Tennis Analytics, Craig O'Shaughnessy, other people around the globe, there's a guy named Mike James in England. We've amassed so much data that it's an indisputable fact that these percentages and numbers are there. Okay, so the next question is, what do you do about it? How do you interpret it as a player? How do you interpret it as a coach? How do you emphasize your practice court to mirror the data, if you will? So what I'm saying, and the art of winning, and what a lot of these guys are saying is, the emphasis first should be on the first 2 shots, and then the next 2 shots, and then after that, we can sort of let the point play out. Okay, there's a good experience you can run with your own players. You can say, okay, have a player play match, okay, or you can watch a match, and anything that's 9 shots or more, just stop the point and flip a coin, because that's about the percentage of win-loss. A 50-50. When you talk about 0 to 4 and 5 to 8, that's when you begin to see which player is doing a better job being consistent or playing better patterns and mixing up their defense, offense, and neutral. So first strike, like I was saying, a lot of times we think about it as an offensive term. You can actually play the first 2 shots very defensively, or just maybe active. Some would say neutral. I don't use that word because I don't like that word. It means disinterested, disengaged. So I like to use the word active, which means engaged. So play an active shot. That's the idea around 70, 20, 10 is we have to understand that this is our sport. And right when we think the point is beginning, it's about to end. And there's a strong psychological impact about playing the first 4 shots on your side of the net. Let me give you a quick example, and then I'm going to give it up to Dan, and then what we can go into some Q&A a bit. I've been working with a couple of players lately. They're both going to play in college. One is 17 and she's about to go off, and then the other is 14. In a few years, she's going to play at a very high level collegiately. And so what I'm trying to get them to understand, because we'll play points, and then I'll be back there tracking, and then I'll show them. And they almost can't believe it because they're just remembering the long points, and they don't believe that. Until I show them the data, they're like, I can't believe the average rally is 2 or 3 shots. Yes, it is. So we focus heavily on the return, where are you going to place the return off of first serve, and the R1. And then after the serve, where are you going to place the S1? And so we've been using, and if you're familiar with the way the art of winning and way I've kind of defined it is, the middle third of the court deep behind the service line, we call those the cages, and then the corners. And so you have the cages deep down the middle and the corners. And these 2 players, I've been getting them to understand, if you cage the first two shots, you create a lot of issues for your opponent. At the same time, you're playing a good margin shot, because the idea is they're making a lot of errors on the return, or they're making a lot of errors on the S1. And we're trying to get them to get through that stage of the point, to push through, right? Because we know that the hardest part about playing a point is getting the ball started. And so from there, we begin to figure out, well, is the player hitting the ball deep enough? Are they hitting the ball with enough spin? Are they hitting it low enough? Like, what are the variables around if they get through the first two shots? Then if they miss, or they hit a return, and then someone just takes the S1 and hits a winner. Why did that happen? So there's a lot of discovery within this focus of the first few shots you hit. And that's the biggest difference between what the art of winning and we are sort of putting forth is the emphasis has got to be there, because that's where everything begins.
That was a good snot. Thank you, Sterling. I wanted to say that the 70-20-10 changed the way we look at tennis and the way it's taught, and now the way it's going to be played forever. This is massive. This blew it apart for me. I need also to say that the amount of resistance I've had, and look, if you could have hate mail in tennis, I probably had the equivalent. When I put out a statistic, the 70-20-10, the criticisms then come wafting in at you from every direction, okay? Because this rocked the tennis world, right? It really did. And it included all the organisations. They still can't accept it, whether they're the LTA and so on. They're starting to now, because they have to, because it's true. But at the time, wham. Okay, objection number one was really quite interesting. People said, and if you actually look at the principle, it says that 70-20-10 applies to ATP Tour down to club level and junior. That's the principle. It's not just 70-20-10. So 70% of the points are over in the first four. It's that goes down like a stick of rock from ATP Tour to club and junior, right? Men's and women's. It applies. Now that was our discovery. That was Sterling's discovery after all those matches that we looked at. No one had really quantified it in that way before. And people would say to us, and this is the real revolutionary part of it. People would say, "Oh, but Dan, that 70-20-10, that 70% only applies to club players because they're not very good, so they're going to miss in the first two shots." Or they then contradict themselves and say, "Dan, that only applies to really good players because they've got such good serves, right? They're so good that they'll hit a winner within the first two shots, right?" And so on and so on. They just could not accept that this was a real piece of data. And when we're teaching players, and for the first time we reveal this to them, they just, it's still shocking because the implications of this have not seeped into the game yet. They've not seeped into the general competitive intelligence and the way that the game's taught and the way that the game's played. The difference, though, between someone who's been taught the 70-20-10 and whose practice court has been transformed in the way that Sterling describes, the difference between a player who starts to at least absorb this information and starts to look at the game in this way is the difference between night and day. They win more. The history of this one is really interesting, and we're still arguing it online at the moment. There are coaches rallying, yeah, and they will not let that. They're like a dogmatic as you like, yeah. They will not let that principle go. We have to rally. Rally is sacred. Rallies should not be questioned. We need to be more consistent. How dare you say we shouldn't? What about technique and so on and so on? It's a bit of a bomb, this one, and as Sterling said in the research he's done, we've got a long way to go yet.
Dan, can I chip in? As a club player who's been playing for 5 years, this just seems like common sense to me. that 70% of points are over in the first 4 shots. You know, it doesn't matter what level. If you're a club player, or our level, it's because people make mistakes. And therefore, if you play consistently as a club player and you're playing someone of a similar standard, if you extend that over 4 shots and you play consistently and conservatively, you're likely to win the point. And at a higher level, the guys have got the shots, then it just makes sense that 0 to 4 is where most of the points are won and lost. But I've not been versed in, you know, the whole sort of tennis methodology and coaching. You know, I was a soccer player 5 years ago, or a very poor soccer player. But tennis is a new game to me. I've been playing it 4 or 5 years. I've got to a certain level, and I talked this over with Dan, and it seemed to make a lot of sense to me. But I think the point I'm trying to make to the group is I don't understand why you're getting this resistance, because it just seems obvious.
One of the things that is the sort of controversy, if you will, is how to interpret the data in a way where it reflects the practices, right? So there's been this old myth, if you will, and I'm going to call it a myth. I'm going to go out on a limb and call it that. If you're able to rally 20 balls over the net in a row, that this makes you a better player. This makes you a player that can win more matches. The data sort of flies in the face of this practice regimen of trying to rally 20 balls in a row over the net. A lot of the practice courts I've observed, and I used to be guilty of this as well, is this idea of we need to be able to sustain a rally. And so when you come out and you say, well, wait a minute, most of the points are ending 0 to 4. The other people are like, well, wait a minute, you've got to be able to learn how to keep the ball going. And so there's this conflict there in those two messages. So what I'm saying is that the data helps us understand that rallying begins with the first 2 shots and then the next 2 shots. And then once you get past the 3rd or 4th shot, especially once you get past 4 shots, you've hit 4 shots in a row, what happens in the brain is you become much more relaxed in your situation, in the sense that you get into a flow. Now, the only thing that can break that flow up is if you start thinking about, oh, I need to get out of this point, or you don't have resilience after that. You don't have any shot resilience. Now, I can understand how rallying 10 balls in a row, 20 balls in a row the expectation is if you can do that, you'll build shot tolerance. But my question is this: how are you starting that rally in a practice? Are you starting it with a drop feed down the middle of the court? Because most of the time you see players go out and they start practicing. What's the first thing they do? They go back, and if it's singles, and they just drop feed the ball and they start rallying, and this is their practice. The problem with that is their practice, if you will, is out of context because it did not begin with a serve and a return and an S1 and an R1. And the movement patterns between those 2 shots are absolutely, completely different than just moving back and forth, rallying. No one receives a ball in a point with a drop feed up the middle of the court. And so the very context of that, of beginning a point there, is not preparing you, right? So as a club player, I can totally understand what Dave is saying. This is like common sense, and it really is. But if you're a player that doesn't, do a lot of, repetition practicing and things like that, and you just go out and play points, it's very easy to click with this and go, oh yeah, these points aren't lasting very long. And it's because you actually play the game with a serve, return, S1, R1, and then you begin the ground stroke rallies from there. So that's really the kickback that is, and the discussion is around that. I'll always say this as a coach: how much time I have with a player on court is going to dictate how much I can really train that player in all different areas of the game. That's going beyond teaching someone how to win. If I've got someone that's just coming out and they're like, they have whatever the strokes they have, teach them how to understand how to negotiate the first two shots and then the next two. And then that's sort of the platform of which the practice court is sort of we're reinventing the practice court. And so there's a lot of discussion around how do you do that? And then at the same time, there's a lot of misunderstanding about the 70-20-10. I would love to hear Johan's take on this and his take on it as a junior player and then coming up through the pros. Did you realize this intuitively, or what's your kind of take on this idea?
Thanks, Sterling. No, I mean, I welcome, guys. Sorry, I had to take that call, so I missed a bit of it. But to answer your question, I was always a type A personality as a kid, and class clown, but also picked as the head of the class. And so I was always a very active class clown, funny guy, but I can be serious. So what made me serious was tennis, because rugby was my number one sport, as Dan would know, rugby in South Africa and the British Lions and everything. The All Blacks, I mean, we knew rugby. So that was my number one sport as a kid. So I was multiple sports, tennis, rugby, athletics, swam like a brick. I was a sprinter. So having the sprinting body and a very quick mindset of, I want to hit it hard, I want to hit it in, and I want to get it over quick. So I intuitively become that 70 percentile player. And I stuck to that 70%, and that's where I had most of my success. That's why I won more on grass, I won more on fast indoors or fast hard courts. Even though I could probably say that if I had learned to play on clay, I could have been the Nadal of my era, perhaps with the Borg in there, but I never played on clay until I was 18 or 17 years old, way too late. So I had to cultivate that mindset if I wanted to go on the clay courts. And I got to the semis of the French in 86, which was 7-8 years later after I started playing pro tennis. So to answer your question, I think for me personally, I think it was more of a osmosis. I was that personality type. It clicked for me. I was a very strong athlete. I had a big serve for a little guy with good hands, very fast running legs. So I was a very aggressive player. So that played into that finishing the point between 2 and 4. I like to play 5 and 8 if I had to, but within that 5 to 8, I was always looking for that very, very hard deep shot that I could put the person off balance, or brought them in after a couple of deep volleys. I would bring them in on a drop shot or a drop shot return and mix it up a bit. So it was more osmosis like in the beginning. As a junior, I knew that, that's where I hang my coat on, and that's how I played most of my career. Even though I knew I could possibly, if I had played more on clay, I think I would have developed that other layer of expertise mentally. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So as you're training players today, how does this mindset of it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what playing style you want to master, the points are going to end in these margins. Mm-hmm. Okay. So how do you kind of relay that information to your kids today, and how you get them to understand that, look, you may try to extend this point, but something's going to happen where it doesn't extend majority of the point of the time. How would you take that information and sort of infuse it into your players' mindsets so they can understand the importance of taking care and being more attentive to the first 4 shots that they strike?
Honestly, Sterling, I think with the new generation, look, at age 17, when I was in high school and boarding school in Pretoria, in a school that is the Afrikaans version of where Elon Musk came from across the street, it's a very different world. And I think kids learn today much more with pictures, and they want to see video, because this is where they're at, right? It's a very different world now. Everything is video. Everything is quick information. Get to the point. Show me. These kids want to see video. They want to see it quickly. But until they do it themselves, I think all of these things play in as as all tools that we can use to coach and let them feel how I do, but then also show them. I video themselves, I show them on a video. And that's how I coach nowadays. And I'm going to even change my coaching style even more with talking to, listening to guys like you, who has been in the trenches for a long time. I mean, I've been coaching for 10, 12 years, but all this data is coming out, and data is really good.
So one of the things that we're doing here at the Art of Winning is we actually are creating something that's less talk and more do and see, right? Mm-hmm. So we're creating games and challenges and point scenarios and creating this visual and then this physical experience, right? So for example, one of the games that I created to sort of highlight this 70-20 rule is a game called First Strike Point Game. Mm-hmm. And so the point of the game is you play to 7 points or 10 points. You got to win by 2. Each player, if they make their first 2 shots, so their serve S1 or their R and R1, each player, if they're successful, they earn a first strike point. Okay, each. If the point continues, they play it out to who gets the winning point, right? So you can earn your first strike point if you hit the first 2 shots back, and you can win the point if you win it. If neither player makes their first 2 shots, only a winning point is awarded.
I see. Okay.
And so the advantage automatically in this game goes to the server because they can serve, return, S1, point over. It's 2-0 because they got the serve got their first strike and their winning point, and the return player missed their R1. Now, there's 3 caveats to this game. An ace is worth 2 points. Mm-hmm. A return winner or a clean winner off the return is 2 points. And then a double fault is 2 points to the returner. So what this game does is it reveals to the players as they begin to play it, they begin to experience how important the first 2 shots are because they get rewarded for it. The server has to make a choice of whether they're going to go for an ace or put themselves and earn 2 points, or put themselves in a predicament where they double fault and lose 2 points. Okay, and the returner has a decision to make. Do they want to try to hit a clean winner off the serve and earn 2 points, or do they just keep losing that winning point if they miss returns? So it's a very interesting game because it highlights the data, takes the data and makes it practical, makes it applicable. These are the types of things here that we're trying to create out of the discovery of the data, right? So you can play different variations of this. You can create your own variation. The key is does your variation emphasize the fact that points are short on average, no matter what you try to do? Now, obviously, if you've got 2 players out there and both of them are in the mood to just lob and lollygag the ball back and forth, then you have what you call just a catch match. It's whoever misses first. But for the most part, that's not what happens, because if you're competing, the competitive nature takes over and someone gets more impatient. Mm-hmm. Right? They become impatient with the other player and they try to end the point. And this is where you get this how the data starts to funnel back into these percentages.